Please make welcome Kentucky Economic Development Secretary Jeff Noel.
I cannot see anything. I'm going to have to do like this the whole speech. Colonel, I do see you. And I told somebody when I retire and you retire, I want your job. So just remember when I need to retire that I'm going to come talk to you if that's quite all right. How is everybody this morning? I wanted to do one quick thing even before I got started. I am a huge John Prime fan. And people ask me all the time, what do we need to do around economic development in this part of the state? What do we need to do in that part of the state? And I love to actually come back with a very simple way of looking at it. John Prime has a song and there's a lyric in it. It don't make much sense. The common sense don't make much sense anymore. What does that really mean? It's really simple. Economic development is common sense. It is a linear equation in which you find folks that have to find workers and you find people who want to work and you connect the two together. Unfortunately, in the world of economic development, workforce development, government, I think sometimes instead of looking at life in that simple way, we spend way too much time creating programs and all these things that we do, and then we think, let's just sell our program and not realize how do we connect the dots between those that have jobs and those that are looking for jobs. Because if you can do that, you can actually make economic development a reality everywhere. And that also means you can advance slides in a far faster, better way. And I'm not doing a very good job doing it. All right, everybody knows if you don't have a purpose in what you do in your life and you don't have a purpose in your economic development organization, your workforce development organization, you're not going to get anywhere. And the folks that work for me know very clearly, if we're not helping create jobs and we're not helping people get access to jobs, when they go home every night, they're living in a shelter. Not shelter in the sense you may think, but a dwelling becomes a home when you have a great job. And if we can make sure we're helping connect those that have jobs, those that want the jobs, and then they can actually have a home, they can dream bigger, do the kind of things that need to get done. Our communities get stronger. So at the end, Brandon, one of my folks who's here, how do we improve life in the home for all Kentuckians and not just a few? I also believe very strongly, and I'm not even going to go through all this, but have a mental picture of your values, your mission, your priorities, both operational, but then what are your strategic imperatives, and then what are the metrics you have to have every year in terms of guiding your work every day. And if you put it on 2 pages, you've got 1 page too many. Figure out a way that you can condense it down to summarize where you want to be. And I'm going to talk momentarily. Not only am I trying to click the slides, I'm doing it left-handed as opposed to right-handed. All of you all know, because many of you participated in our blueprint, but common sense says we have to win the automotive because we're relying on automotive. We have to lead the manufacturing renaissance. But the area that I heard most in terms of meetings at SOAR and others in this part of the state was we also have to make economic development a real strategy around tourism development. Tourism is economic development because if you've got more things happening, more restaurants, more things to do, you can attract folks just like we saw in the video. You can help companies attract and retain employees. Tourism is a great thing for economic development. And when I first got here, I had some of my colleagues push back. Trust me, Kentucky has the most natural, beautiful assets, and we need to capitalize upon that. We also have to make sure, quite candidly, that entrepreneurship and innovation is there in some of the things we're doing from an enabler perspective. And last but not least, I think we have to actually get our fair share of business and professional jobs, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Some of the data points in terms of the year, because I was asked to summarize the year in Kentucky, we're on a good roll. You just saw the jobs have been created. I think it's some 60,000 jobs, some almost $40 billion of investment. But we don't take enough time, nor do we thank SOAR enough for the job they do in terms of helping work with high growth businesses or startup companies. And we need to remember that in terms of the things that we do. That was on the previous job, and man, I have really messed this up. I want to also talk about the fact that we create jobs through the hub, but we need to do a better job in Kentucky not always celebrating the big ribbon cuttings for the big projects. We've got to make sure we have better tools and more opportunities for the entrepreneurial opportunities that exist, and we need to do a better job of doing that. Now, summary. I just showed you a lot of data points that have happened in Kentucky, the size of the projects that we get, the fact that we've had 139 companies that we've had to respond to with a formal package. And a lot of times I meet with people that says, well, how come you're not referring them to our part of the state? When are you going to start doing that? Let me give you some data points. We've actually recommended the communities in the SOAR areas individually 139 times. Keep that in your mind because you see the most highly submitted properties in our portfolio as a state, and how many of these properties have we recommended here in the SOAR communities? Because in the end, and Bruce Carpenter knows this as well as anybody, you still have to win the project even if we recommend them. And a lot of you may not believe it, but we get a prospect inquiry, and unless they exclude, we try to make sure that every one of those 5 regions we've talked about as a cabinet have recommendations so they have an opportunity to win those projects. And just as importantly, because I'm a big believer in this, the more times you're at bat, the likely you're going to be more likely to hit that home run. You need the reps with companies coming to visit with you. That's why we encourage them to at least understand we have lots of communities we'd like for you to take a look at, to evaluate and determine whether or not you want to locate. Quickly, I'm just going to go through a couple of slides, but one of my real pet peeves is people tell me all the time, I've got some industrial land we'd love for you to recommend companies to. You go look at it, and you realize it's not an industrial piece of property. So just look at these 2 slides. What's the difference in Kentucky, and these are 2 properties in Kentucky, between a $15,000 piece of industrial land versus a $315,000 per acre industrial park? We should always be striving to have those industrial parks in our community because they have a whole fledgling levels of services that help make you much more competitive. Also, I'm going to tell you, look at the definitions of the 2, and I won't go through them. It's common sense. What makes a value-oriented situation where you can plug and play if you're a company versus a piece of ground that you're not real sure what you're getting into and how much cost is different. As you all know, I've done some development in my own life on my own nickel, and the difference between a piece of ground I thought was flat and perfect versus a piece of ground that looked troublesome, it was only a swing of about $120,000 an acre. The one that didn't look so good was the cheapest to actually get developed, and the one that looked the flattest and best was the most expensive. You never know by looking at the surface. You got to do the data to know whether you have the sites, and you all, and SOAR does a great job of doing all these things. Real quick, if you haven't submitted your KPDI application, we're on a roll to get those done. We've accelerated the timeline for this particular round so that we can actually get out and give you recommendations and make awards early part of next year. If you see your county on this map without a dot, you have not applied, nor have you been awarded a KPDI. I'm showing this not to embarrass. I'm showing this to say, what can we do to help you? If you have not applied or submitted or been awarded an application, we want to help you take advantage of this program because who knows whether it will be reauthorized in the session going forward. We also want to encourage a lot of communities to realize that these projects do take time, but when they do get settled, look at all the projects that we have awarded, over $4 billion of announcements, 6,000 jobs have created. That's the difference between having a piece of land you call industrial and having both a piece of ground that you've been doing some of the development work and you know everything else that has to be done to actually bring a company in, site them, and have them start construction. That's the big difference between winning and losing, and I hate to say it. It's a mindset, but it's also having the data and controlling the things that you can control. If you haven't applied for a grant program, and SOAR has done a fabulous job, this map shows every community or not-for-profit, because you're eligible, that has applied for a grant program. Let me make it real easy. Go out and find a federal grant, and they are still available. And if there's a local match requirement, You'll have to put up between 1% and 3%, and we will fund the balance. We've had not-for-profits come in and do workforce programs. We've had communities do splash pads. We've had communities that have done infrastructure work. This is a program that you give us the application by the 1st of the month. By the 21st of the month, we tell you whether it has been awarded and approved, and we have been able to thankfully approve some 258 projects with the grant program. There is 10 times more money in grant programs. There is 100 times more grant money at the federal level than at the state level. So take full advantage of the program and make sure, if you will, that we do not end the year with any available fundings that has not gone used. Now I'm going to get on my high horse a little bit and give you what I really came to talk about. And I'm not getting any of these things to turn, but I'm sure it will here in a second. We've got a lot of awards. We earned those awards because of all of you all. I've preached it and I've preached it. Cabinet for Economic Development is on the bottom end of an organizational chart. You all are on the top end of the organizational chart. The mayors, the judges, the local economic development professionals. But when you are on the top sphere, you have a greater responsibility to not only lead, but tell us how we can help you and where we can go about partnering together to make a difference. And if you don't give us that leadership, we're left to try to guess what do each of the 120 counties and 432 cities across Kentucky really need. You've heard me say that before. You all have the solutions. You all know exactly what is needed. Make sure we understand as a cabinet where we can go out and make that difference. Folks, I wanted to give, and this is not legislative, I wanted though to give you some ideas that we have been working with all of you. As you know, we have what we call our turf meetings, where we go out in the state across the 5 areas, invite everybody into each area, change up the meetings 3 times a year. We've been talking about what it is that you need as local economic developers. 97% of those that came to our meeting said, we don't have the tools we need to be successful. Folks, I really believe that the voice of the economic developers must be heard this upcoming session. And here's just a few thoughts I have. First of all, our signature tool to do economic development is the KBI program. I love the fact I'm paying less income tax than I would have been paying 3 years ago. But here's the reality of it. Our KBI program is basically saying we'll abate your corporate income tax and we will provide a rebate of the individual income taxes that are paid by your employees. I love the program. It doesn't impact the budget. It's a pay-as-you-go. But if you do it right as a company, you get an annuitized cash grant for 10 to 12 years. Now with the reduction in the income tax from 5 to 3.5%, whatever level we negotiate of that, we are now operating with tools that are 70% of the value that we ever had before. Think about that. 70% of the value that we have ever had before. We need a fix to bring back the KBI program to its previous levels, and we need to keep the philosophy of pay-as-you-go. We are recommending, and I believe you all need to help us recommend, that if we're not going to bring KBI back to its original value, find us other tools. But also know that in sales taxes, whether you file your return and look at the income tax or the IRS table, or you go to the Tax Heritage Foundation, there is data that says, based upon what you earn in the state of Kentucky, you will spend about 2.48% of your earnings in sales taxes because of our 6% sales tax. So we're asking for the legislature to take the KBI program back to 5% by using 1.5% of that sales tax, because that's still the same thing. Create a new job, it's net new revenue, let's give a portion of it back for a period of time, everybody comes out ahead. Second thing that I feel like we have to do, and this is not a member of the legislator's fault, I'm telling you right now, I cannot speak better about the Kentucky General Assembly. They are good to me, they've been good to our cabinet, they work every day. The challenge is they don't know sometimes what we don't share with them is important for us. So we have a great legislative body, we have a great governor. I don't buy into all of this friction that goes on between the two, except that's politics. But behind the scenes, when it comes to jobs and what's good for communities, we all need to work together, and we do. But here's the one issue. We have passed economic development programs that are a one-size-fits-all, that don't allow for individuality and don't allow for adjustments based upon the unique challenges of each and every community. You realize, of course, 120 counties have different needs and different requirements. So we need to create a rural development package so that every tool in the Cabinet for Economic Development has greater flexibility and in some cases statutory differences to add more funding and more support for communities in the rural areas. I believe in those rural areas, in addition to the 5% of KBI, we should be able to go up to another 1% for all projects in rural areas. I also believe we need to make sure that if we could use KBI for the attraction of the individual family like we saw there in Pikeville. So if there's a community that's got a remote worker program, allow it to be worked two ways. Go to my employer or other employers and say, if you're going to hire remote workers, please hire the remote workers in Kentucky, and we have tools to help you identify that individual. And even if it's only 4 individuals, we're going to incentivize you with the KBI tools for 12 years. The flip side of it is, if an individual wants to move here and work here, let's give that benefit to the community, and if the community then decides to give that KBI benefit to the relocating family, fantastic. I really believe our KBI tool should be somewhat useful and flexible in allowing you to do remote worker or those who want to remotely work and then relocate into the great state of Kentucky, especially in our rural areas. I really believe that if we're going to reauthorize the KBI program, rural communities should have the ability to apply for more money than the urban communities. Instead of $2 million per county, it should be at least $2.5 million. I also believe any border community in rural Kentucky, we should work to create reciprocity with the adjoining state, because here's the issue. If you're trying to bring a company into Pikeville, I think the figure is about 23% of the workers come from across the state line. You try to put a project down in Ashland, that number is about 26% will be living across the river in another state, whether it's West Virginia or Ohio. So if we offer an incentive to a company looking at a border community in rural Kentucky, today we operate at 70% of our value with KBI, and 30% of the benefits that we can't offer because 30% of their workers thereabouts are going to be living in the adjoining state. What if we could partner with our adjoining communities to make sure that we can offer incentives from Ohio, West Virginia for a company that's going to locate in Ashland, or West Virginia, Virginia if they're going to be in Pikeville? Better yet, and also conversely, if a company is going to locate on the other side of the river from Ashland, we should offer incentives based upon the number of folks that live in Kentucky but work in that area. We need to find ways of using common sense for a lot of our economic development tools. I also believe very strongly that our closing fund should have dedicated funding for rural Kentucky. And I believe our Bluegrass State Skills funding should have set-aside funding for my discretion to use funding for rural Kentucky. The time is now, with all the benefits that are occurring. We are on a roll as a state, but where we have stars of located companies is not quite equilibrium across all of the state. And the best way of creating opportunities in those that have yet to actually have those opportunities is to continue landing big projects in some of the more regionalized areas and making sure we get the other companies in more of those rural areas. And let me give you a statistic. I had our team pull up how many companies, not hospitals, I love hospitals. Hospitals are an economic development tool as well. I'm not talking about retail. I'm not talking about office-based companies. I'm saying how many manufacturers in rural Kentucky, as we have defined rural Kentucky, employ more than 500 people? There are 3. How many employ more than 250 to 500? There are 4. How many employ 100 to 250? Well, there are 43. But how many employ 20 to 50? 500. KBI is designed to incentivize heavy, big investment tied to manufacturing. There are a lot of type of manufacturing today, even advanced manufacturing, that we need to have better incentives, those 20, 30, 40 employees. And today, you don't get the same benefit out of KBI for those 20, 30, and 40 employers. That's why we want to change the program so we add extra benefits and add ways in which they can get a bigger benefit if they go locating in rural Kentucky. And I say that because while I hope we will land a 250-person company in rural Kentucky, there's only 7 in all of rural Kentucky today after, 200 years of manufacturing. I really believe focusing on those 50-size employers and having tools dedicated to attract those folks is the way to go. I've got other things that I'd love to go see talking about in terms of how we support rural Kentucky, but I'll close by telling you we are so lucky to have SOAR, so lucky to have the leadership, so lucky to have all the economic developers that I know throughout all of rural Kentucky and in the areas of SOAR. Look, folks, we have great leaders. We have great judges and mayors, many of whom I have met with, many of whom have no problems texting me or calling me or coming to see me, and I just give them credit for saying that's what you should be doing, because leadership at the top is at the local area. My job at the state level is to support all of you. I just appreciate the chance you all have given me to be with the Cabinet for Economic Development. I don't care whether it's our export program that we help support you all, whether it's helping to grow small and startup businesses, which I'd love to see the legislature provide funding for us to invest in a startup high-tech growth fund in eastern and rural Kentucky. We can do a lot more together if we use more common sense and step away and say, yes, I still want to be striving towards that silver bullet. Yes, I still want to strive for that 500 employer opportunity to come into rural Kentucky. But I want to spend every day using common sense and saying, what are the things that we can control? What are the areas in which we need to make sure we have the best products and the best services? We have communities that are working on placemaking. We have economic developers helping to bring infrastructure grants into those communities. And we actually have communities that are supporting rural areas for entrepreneurship and innovation. By the way, those are the 5 key focus areas in our cabinet. They are common sense approaches that we want to continue to work together on. And let me just finish this up by saying, you all know the story. I spent 28 and a half years in Michigan, a beautiful area right on the lake. I spent 6 years in Washington, D.C., and I've had the privilege since I got out of college in 1980, don't tell anybody. I've traveled every year at least 3 or 4 times internationally. There is no place like Kentucky. There is no place like the people of Kentucky. And there is no place like a place to raise your family than Kentucky. And there is no greater workforce than Kentucky. Great companies, no matter how big or small, need great talent. And great talent needs great communities. So therefore, there is this linear equation: jobs, those looking for the jobs. But the secret sauce is we have to have great communities, great places to live, great places to raise our families, and then we can grow those types of things. And so I just would say we're a better place than in rural Kentucky and in the communities of SOAR, than the great people who live here, the great leaders who are here, the great workers that are here. Let's take full advantage of that, and let's continue to work together to build opportunities for all Kentuckians and not just a few. And when I retire and you need another colonel, there'll be 2 of us sitting in the room thanking you all for everything you all do. Thank you very much.